welcome to UC Today. I'm Susie Harrison, Head of Content. Financial institutions communicate with clients and stakeholders through multiple channels: emails, social media, messaging, apps and more, and obviously these are growing too. So while this enhances customer engagement and service efficiency, it also introduces significant regulatory and compliance challenges. So to gain insights into how financial firms can navigate these complexities, I'm happy to be joined by Tim Ward, who is from the product marketing team at compliance specialist Global Relay. So thanks for joining me, Tim.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks for having me, Susie.
Great. So Tim's going to be offering up some not to be missed tips on best practice to mitigate compliance risks. So let's dive in and start by setting the scene. So can you start by explaining some of the most common compliance risks that organisations face today and why proactive risk management is essential?
Yes, I think we've got to start with off-channel communications because this is where most of the recent enforcement action has been. Since 2021, actually $2 billion in fines just from the SEC, $600 million last year and $60 million already this year. So off-channel communications really describes when employees use channels such as WhatsApp or even text messaging if they're not being managed and monitored by the firm. Most of these firms will have had recording mechanisms for landline voice communications and email for some time, but some firms haven't yet caught up with the new trends and usage of these other communication channels for business. And even though firms might have policies in place, employees for various reasons don't always follow those policies. And that's really what the regulator is finding and fining these firms for. It seems relatively easy for the regulator to bring these cases to conclusion, and the enforcement has been fairly consistent. So most compliance leaders would tell you that the worst position to be in is being the last to know and then having to react to an issue. And these compliance teams have got lots of different priorities and only a fixed amount of budget and resources. But the off-channel communication is still a priority one issue. It's in the red zone, and firms can't deny that these enforcement actions are happening. So it's really important that they kind of get ahead of this and stay on top and be proactive.
And do you have a sense of that lack of compliance from individual employees? Do you think that comes primarily from a lack of training, lack of understanding, perhaps a poor compliance culture within their firms, or maybe option D, all of the above?
I think every firm has a different kind of characteristic and a different sort of stance from a compliance perspective. So some firms are very kind of principle based, and they build and sort of strong cultures. Other firms can be quite rule based. So particularly US regulators are historically very prescriptive in their rules, and some firms follow the rules, and when they're following the rules they think, okay, we've got the policies in place, we've got the procedures in place. And the difficulty with that is that when things change quickly and when technology advances, technically they can be seen as following the rules, but they're still exposed to kind of compliance gaps and risks because of changes that perhaps even aren't baked yet into the actual regulations.
Yeah, it's amazing how it's going to have to keep up. The technology is evolving so quickly that it's almost like every day the regulation has to change to keep up, which is obviously difficult when you're lawmaking.
That's right, and particularly in this area, there's a lot of change, and it's a dynamic nature. People have realized how powerful the social media platforms are and how politically powerful they are. So there's constant changes of ownership, of usage, and those existing platforms like WhatsApp are going to continue to build. But we're also going to see lots of new types of platforms on the fringes as well. I think if you were to say the large financial firms, the biggest banks in the world, would be using TikTok like 3 years ago, you might have raised an eyebrow, and now that's like an essential part of their kind of marketing mix.
Yeah, it doesn't seem naturally aligned, does it?
No, but where the audience is and where the possible customers are, then that's where the these organisations will follow.
Yeah, fair enough. So how can companies strengthen their data security practices to ensure compliance with these evolving regulations?
Well, I think the first thing is just awareness. So the firms have got to create an inventory of all of the different types of channels that are currently in use today for communicating with their customers. And I think, most firms would be surprised how many names are on that list. It could be in the tens or even the hundreds of different ways in which their organization communicates with their customers across the world. Normally there's a principle of kind of trust but verify in compliance, which I do broadly agree with. But in this case, I think in a recent survey we did, over 75% of firms believed that there was some sort of off-channel communication occurring within their firm. So I think the starting position has to be, yes, I think this is happening within our firm. I've just got to find out where it's happening, why it's happening, and who's involved. And hopefully I can then create a plan to prevent that in the future. And I think the solution is just a combination of training, education, policies and procedures, and technology. Here at Global Relay, we're obviously interested in the technology piece, but we know that blanket bans don't really work, and they can create a false sense of security for the firms, because the pressure now on using WhatsApp is being driven by the customers, the peers, the competitors, the customers are all relying on these platforms, and that's where they want to do business. And so because of that pressure, I think the question now is how can we use them compliantly versus how can we stop employees using them? Yeah.
So I'm going to guess that regulatory reporting is a somewhat onerous task, particularly in the financial, healthcare, these more sensitive industries. So what do you see as the key challenges in that regulatory reporting, and how can organisations improve their accuracy and efficiency?
Yeah, so first of all, assuming that firms know what reports they need to generate and when they need to send them to regulators, and which regulators need to receive which reports, which in itself is a challenge in itself. I think regulatory reporting is difficult because often those reports require the aggregation and the compilation of data from multiple different sources. So if you have a large organization that has multiple products in different geographical areas, you have to go out into the far reaches of the organization, retrieve the information, collate it, review it, and that becomes even more difficult if there's data gaps which are going to get exposed to the regulators. Sending the report is also only really half the story. The regulator is going to assess that report, look for those gaps, look for anomalies or outliers, things that are different in that report to the one that they received last quarter or last year. And then at a minimum, if they find any of those discrepancies, you'll get a kind of a please explain request. And then those firms have got to be sure that they can go back and get all of the information that was used to compile the numbers for those reports. And that is never ending. There's a report that covers almost every different aspect of financial services, from how they manage complaints end to end to liquidity requirements, and the list goes on. And so I think in terms of making that more efficient, the goal is really to operationalize or ideally automate the production of those reports. It's a lot easier to generate the report if the data is already aggregated into a single location, and if that report is being routinely generated daily, weekly or monthly versus every year that it's required. It's a bit like doing your tax return and then saving everything up to the last day. It's a lot easier if you keep all of your receipts and your expenses as you go along, and you're not saving it up for the last day. So I think aggregating that data, routinely running the report, automating the report, and making sure that you've got access to everything that you need that's available is, really important.
It's funny that, because as you were describing the process, it was taking me back to being freelance and doing my tax return and slightly hoping for the best that I've done it
Absolutely.
correctly.
As a freelancer historically as well, there's always that receipt that's missing, or there's always
Yeah.
that dinner that you can't quite remember. And 80% of the production, if not more, is about dealing with those anomalies and those gaps. So the fewer gaps that you have, the better. And the stakes for these financial firms in submitting a report that's not correct, I would say, is even higher than our freelancer expense reports.
Yeah, it seems like there's lots of margin for error, and I suppose this is where technology is our friend.
Yeah. I mean, technology is really good at this type of thing. It's good at storing data. It's good at classifying data. It can see patterns. It can run reports that show anomalies. We can get alerts and dashboards that inform us that. And I think all of this is designed to be able to flag something and alert us to something so that we can take action and be proactive. It really goes back to that point about being the first to know versus the last to know. Because if there's an issue and if it escalates and if you have regulatory scrutiny, it just creates a lot of stress for everybody. There's a lot of inefficiencies. And so if that can be minimized or reduced as far as possible, it helps everybody.
So, moving on from that, how can financial institutions ensure effective record keeping, while maintaining security and efficiency?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about creating that inventory and understanding what business communications looks like today for your firm, covering voice, text, email, the use of the social channels, the use of WebEx and GoToMeeting and other conferencing channels, all of the marketing channels that are in place. So creating that inventory and then designing an overall strategy to capture all of those methods and be able to store them, manage them, and monitor them. Most of those platforms will have integrations and APIs that allows for the aggregation and the export of that information. And in terms of mobile communications, there's also various options. In some cases, you can directly capture that information from the carrier, such as AT&T in the US or O2 in the UK. WhatsApp will have a business integration that allows us to capture those messages. And so there are advantages and disadvantages in all of the different methods. We also have an app which employees can install on their mobile device, which gives them voice calling, text messaging, the ability to message on WhatsApp. And those are already integrated into the archiving and record keeping system. And they also provide quite a lot of productivity and efficiency enhancements for the employees as well. So a lot of it's creating kind of the least path of resistance to the employees, allowing them to be compliant without even thinking about it or really changing significantly their kind of current processes. They all have advantages and disadvantages, and it's quite a complex landscape with all of the different channels and the different requirements in the different countries. And so we spend a lot of time advising clients and helping them understand what their current landscape looks like and then what their future, could look like. It's quite common for firms to put in kind of point solutions to address a particular issue, maybe with a particular channel or within a particular country or department. And so the other thing that we help people do is rationalize and aggregate and simplify their technology landscape so that they're dealing with fewer systems. They can reduce their risk. There's economies of scale, and it just makes things kind of simpler moving forward.
And I guess picking up on moving forward, what trends do you foresee coming down the pipeline in the future of compliance risk management?
Well, I think it's still going to be fairly dynamic in terms of business communications. We talked a little bit about the wrestling for power at the top. Platforms like Meta and WhatsApp, I think, will continue to grow, but we'll also see lots of additional fringe applications pop in and become popular. What's quite interesting is that a number of these platforms like Line and Signal, they don't just do messaging, they've got integrated payments, and eventually you'll be able to perform full workflows and transactions within the messaging experience, which brings a whole different set of compliance challenges. I think despite the enforcement activity, compliance leaders understand that the blanket bans, don't really work. And so I think we're past that tipping point, which is this is the reality. And so how do we enable this for our business to make people more productive and efficient and support these channels versus just banning them? We are seeing a little bit of a shift back to using corporate devices. So a few years ago, I guess around the pandemic, BYOD was very popular. I think just in reaction to that enforcement, firms are providing employees with corporate devices more, and that's in reaction to, certainly some of that enforcement activity, and particularly for those higher risk employees and the senior executives. And I think we've probably broken the record because we've been talking for 10, 15 minutes without mentioning AI. So I've got to drop AI into the back of the call here, which is, AI is going to disrupt compliant mobile communications just like it has with every other aspect of technology. We've spent quite a lot of time investing in AI, particularly to be able to understand and interpret financial conversations that are hard to understand. Perhaps they use trader lingo, or they're in very noisy environments. And really, it's allowed us for the first time to be able to accurately transcribe those calls, understand who's talking and what they're talking about, and then that allows us to run surveillance and monitoring activities across lots of different risk types, everything from market abuse to bribery to even behavioral issues as well. So that's really exciting what's kind of coming up from the AI point of view.
Well, yeah, it's definitely not going away, is it?
I don't think so.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Tim, from Global Relay, for joining me today. It's a really interesting discussion. And to our viewers, we'll be releasing more stories on uctoday.com around these topics. And of course, these are not topics that can be overlooked. We all need to understand and be keeping up with the important regulations here. So, thanks again, Tim, and thank you to everyone for watching.